Hey there, writer rebels. Is your complicated plot getting you down? Well, maybe it's time to try a plot wall. Join me today while I talk about what a plot wall is, how to set one up, and the positives and negatives of using a plot wall. Hello everyone, it's me, Scarlett Kol, young adult author, YouTuber, and storyteller, and I am back on Thursdays to talk about writing and publishing. This week we are going to be talking about writing, specifically plotting, but before we get into that, I would like to say thank you to all my subscribers who keep coming back week after week, and if you are brand new here, make sure you check out the channel and see if there's anything else that you might like. If you do want to get more content from me, make sure you're hitting that subscription bar and the notification bell below this video so it'll let you know every single time that I put out a new video, which is typically once a week. All right, so let's get started. What exactly is a plot wall? What am I talking about? And what does this even mean? Okay, so a plot wall is basically exactly how it sounds. It's how to plot your novel on a wall. It is a visual representation of your plot, and it can be designed in various different ways. I will show you my plot wall before we get into the benefits and negatives of using a plot wall, but before we get into that video, there's a lot of people who use this. Essentially, I've seen it many times before. The person who introduced me to it essentially was my friend Stella Brecht. She is an author, writes contemporary romance, and she was using it on a wall at a writing retreat that I was at. She had Post-it notes all along the wall in the room that she was staying in, and she had learned how to plot by Post-it note through Cherry Adair, which is also another romance author who offers plotting classes. I've also seen other writers like Sarah Cannon over on the Heart Breathings YouTube channel using a plot wall recently for her latest book, and she has a video on that, and I will include that in the comments below of just her setting that up and what her board was to look like. So I had seen these things before, but it wasn't something I typically use. I usually use my Excel spreadsheets. I really like Excel. I'll use different beat sheets. I'll use notebooks, all that sort of thing. But a plot wall was not something that I had ever tried doing before. Although the concept is very simple. Essentially, you would set up a place on a wall where you could spread out. Sometimes you can go directly onto the wall. You'll notice in mine a little bit later, I used butcher paper and I went vertical with mine. If you look at Sarah Cannon's video, she used some white paper and she went horizontal with hers. So it really just comes down to how you feel and how you think and how things work for you. But essentially you would set that up and then you could either write directly on that piece of paper, or, which I would prefer, is to use Post-it notes in various different colors to represent your plots and your subplots or anything else that you want to highlight about your plot as you go through. Maybe it can be different character point of views. Maybe it could be your romance subplot versus your regular plot. Maybe it could be various different characters where they're interacting in different scenes, whatever you really need to highlight. So you would use the different Post-it notes. The Post-it notes are nice because you can move them around and change things, or if you really don't like something, you can pull it off, start over. But you would put this on your wall in the way that your plot's going to go. You're going to see mine was broken into a 3-act structure because that's what I use. So I was following the 3-act structure of which scenes need to be within each act. However, whichever plotting method that you use would be the way you would want to set up your plot wall. On mine, I also included a few other notes of major beat points that hit in those various different acts. So it was a nice little reminder for me. The nice thing about using the Post-its as well is I can reuse this board for my next project, or if I want to rearrange things and redo it, I can do that. Plus, because it's not actually on the wall itself, it's on a piece of paper. If I was really desperate, I could roll it up and put it away. So before I show you my plot wall, I do want to explain why I'm going to be trying to use it this time, even though this isn't normally my jam. The reason I tried using a plot wall is I was really frustrated with the book that I was working on. The plot just didn't seem to be coming together. I was using my beat sheets, and according to those, I was hitting all of the beats as I should be, but for some reason the plot was just not working for me. I did make one change kind of around the middle of the book, and it kind of had this trickle-down effect that messed with everything else, even though I still kind of had that structure in place. So I wanted something that was going to be a little bit more visual for me. In the end, you could probably still do this in Excel with various different colors, but I really wanted to see that whole plot right in front of me. So I decided to try this experiment and give it a go. At the end of the experiment, I decided that A, it does definitely work because I did crack my plot problem in about 2 to 3 days, which was awesome. Granted, I had been thinking about it for a long time, but seeing everything in its place definitely did help. Will I use this for every single book? Absolutely not. And I will go and explain those reasons after we talk a little bit more about the benefits and how to set up your plot wall. So without further ado, here is some footage of me working with my plot wall. All right, so as you go through, you can see that I've used various different colors. In this case, I'm using it for subplots, and there's little yellow stickies as well because this particular book follows a very strict timeline. So I need to know which days of the week there are all these events occurring. So when you go to set up your plot wall, like I said, you could either go horizontal, you can go vertical, you can do whatever you want, but there's a few things that I think you need to do to set yourself up for success. First one is to use good tools. I use Post-it notes, and I know this is the first time I've done the plot wall, but I've been doing a Kanban board with Post-it notes for a really, really long time. And one of the things I will definitely recommend to you is to use Post-it brand or a brand that you are really, really, really trust. Why do I say that? Because there are so many Post-it notes out there that you can buy the store brands and they just fall off. Just imagine plotting out your entire book and all of your scenes, and then all of a sudden you go to bed, come back, and all those Post-it notes have fallen off, or several of them have fallen off in various different places. Granted, if you do have cheaper Post-it notes, I mean cheap quality, not necessarily price, because sometimes more expensive Post-it notes actually don't work quite as well. You can actually tape them on if you do want to use the ones, or you're not getting the colors that you need. I do really like the Post-it brand. They seem to stick very well for me. I do know there's some other store brands that work as well too. The other thing you need to think about is, where are you going to place your wall? If you're going to be putting it in a very prominent place in your house, how is that going to affect other people in your space? If you have company, are you going to need to be able to put that away? Is it in a space that's totally dedicated to you? In my case, it's in my office. So there's not a lot of people that are coming and going from my office. And if they do, they know I'm a writer and they know that this is in my space, so that's fine. There are ways around this. For instance, if you use the butcher paper or poster paper method, you could put it on the back of a closet door, someplace that people aren't going to look for it. My friend Stella actually has a cardboard layout, so she can put it up on the wall and then she can slide it under the bed whenever she has company and it's out of the way. So you do need to think of how you can set this up, where the wall space is for you to set that up, and how long can you leave it. If you're working on your book and you're going to leave it up for the entire duration, that could be a while. So you need to make sure that you're thinking ahead of how this is going to impact your space. The other thing you need to think about is making sure that you are using sturdy materials. In my case, I'd used washi tape to put my butcher paper together. Unfortunately, it didn't hold very well, and when I woke up the next morning, all of the various different pieces between the acts had fallen onto the floor. So you can't see the back of it, but it's covered in a bunch of packing tape to make sure that everything stays put. Had I actually had Post-it notes on there by that point, I would have been so disappointed. But if you set yourself up with a sturdy base, one that's going to work for you, in a space where you can leave it for a period of time with strong and sturdy Post-it notes, you're going to be just fine. The other thing you need to consider is, how high is your wall? Do you have small children? Do you have pets who are going to bite off your Post-it notes and hide them? This can be a problem. So you need to make sure that your wall is high enough or not accessible to those people who might try to derail your plans. All right, so let's get started. What are the benefits of using a plot wall? Well, one of the biggest benefits of using a plot wall is that you can see your plot all in one place. You can follow it all the way along and you can see everything in one glance. Granted, you probably have to go a little bit closer to see very specifics on Post-it notes, but you can see everything all at once. If you have it broken down into acts, you're gonna see which acts are light on scenes, which ones are very heavy. Maybe you need to be able to break that down a little bit more. Maybe something needs to shift. Maybe you need to cut things so that it balances out a little bit more. So you can really see your beats and your act structure very, very quickly and see which acts are very scene heavy and which ones aren't. A second benefit, which is very similar to this but serves a different purpose, is, remember, in my plot wall, I have various different colors for my subplots. Well, it was very easy for me to tell where I was missing subplot action. So when I was at the top, I was really good with my subplots, making sure I'd included references to all of them and everything was great. But when I got somewhere around the middle, I noticed that some of my subplots tended to fall off for either the greater plot or specific other plots. And when I was trying to solve my plotting problems, I realized that I was missing some of my subplots and was able to bring some of that back in and bounce it off the main plot so that A, the subplot is now stronger and more cohesive, plus it helped me break through some of those plotting barriers that I was having. This can also work in opposite. If you notice that you have a lot of subplot notes or very, very character heavy, if you've split everything by POVs or certain characters, and that was not your intention, then this is going to show you maybe where you need to cut back in some of those places. If it's taking away too much from your main plot, maybe you need to cut back on some of your subplots or character points of view to make your main plot shine. The other benefit of using a plot wall is because it's movable. It's very, very easy to move your post-it notes around. You could actually put 3 or 4 different options of what you want to do beside each other. And as you work through and read through your wall, you can see which ones make sense and put those into place. Or maybe a scene from here, move somewhere else. I know a lot of people will use note cards to do this when they plot their novels. However, on the wall, obviously it's going to stay there. It's going to be a little bit more permanent than just having note cards in a row, and you can see everything all at once. And the last benefit I found with the plot wall is that it is very motivating. As you are putting those post-it notes up, you are seeing this story take shape, take form. And even though sometimes it can be very overwhelming to be plotting an entire book because there are so many things that are going on, you get to see yourself progressing. You get to see you move down or across the wall and how those scenes are coming together and the fact that you do have this full cohesive book. And sometimes one of the things that can really, really hold you back when you're plotting isn't necessarily the plot itself. It can sometimes just be your confidence. It can be the fact that it is an overwhelming task to plot a new book. If you haven't done a new book recently, maybe you've been in edits for a while or you've taken a break, it can feel very overwhelming. By seeing all these beautiful post-it notes on your board, you are going to see how far you've come and how far you have left in a very visual and very immediate kind of way. This can be a huge, huge confidence boost, and it definitely was for me. I managed to crack my plot line in about a weekend, and a lot of that was just seeing those post-it notes coming together. And when I got to those parts that were really, really sticky for me, I realized how small of a space that was really taking up in the book. It felt like this huge, big elephant in the room when I was trying to plan it and plot it every other way. But seeing it in the grand scheme of the novel, it became not so much as of a threat as it used to be. And it was so much easier to break it down and put it into pieces so I could get through that problem and work it through. One other thing that I didn't mention that I did after I finished with my plot wall is I also took a look at variation. This isn't necessarily something that you need to do, but the areas that I changed, I actually put what the original plot was, and then I put in my variations in beside it so I could compare and contrast and see if there was anything that I needed to pick up or if I'd completely missed something. This was really nice to be able to see both of those things right beside each other. So that way I knew I wasn't missing anything and I knew that I was confident with the new plot that I had put together. All right, so everything sounds all well and good. So why wouldn't I use a plot wall every time I draft a book? Well, there's a few different reasons. First off, that's a lot of post-it notes. By the time I was done, I basically had a full closet door full of post-it notes because it's a 90 to 95,000 word book. So it's got a lot of scenes in it. In this particular case, I actually had most of it together and they were really not necessary for me to have all of the post-its breaking all that stuff down, probably for the first half to 3/4 of the book because the problem was in the last quarter. Granted, I was trying this as an experiment and I did break through the problem that I'd been having for several months with this book. So sometimes trying something new and shaking it up can definitely make things a little bit easier. However, if you are already confident with how you put your plots together, you have good beat sheets, or in my case, you like to use Excel to do something very, very similar in a digital sort of format, you're saving a whole bunch of trees and you aren't sitting there writing out all those post-it notes. The second thing is the fact that it is time consuming. It takes a lot of time to set up a plot wall and write out all of those post-it notes. especially if you already are confident with many things in your plot. If you already have an idea of how things are coming together, then writing this stuff out can be helpful because it's refreshing your memory, but can also feel really, really redundant because you are already like confirmed and solid in those plot points. So it may just be a little bit too much overkill for a lot of plots unless you are really, really starting from scratch and not really sure where to go. For some people, they really like the visualization of this, but for me, it was great in this particular instance, but generally, I don't think that I need that much visual of my book as I'm putting it together. The other negative I found was that I was limited in what I could write. So one of the things that happens to me, and I don't know if it happens to you, is once I hit on a plot point, especially if I've been frustrated or I realize something about a character, I need to write that down right away. I need to, not necessarily write a scene, but flesh out various different things that need to happen. And you can do that on Post-it notes, but it isn't necessarily the space that you have to do those sorts of things. So when I hit a point like that, I actually had to go to a notebook or to my computer and write all that stuff out and try to tie it back to where that's going to hit in the plot wall. So for me, I do find it a little easier either digitally or in a notebook. Notebooks can get a little frustrating because, you're ripping out pages and all that sort of stuff, but you might be able to put things in order how you want. But if you do it digitally or on a piece of paper, you can add all of that extra detail that you want to write when you need to and when that muse and inspiration strikes. I find that there just is not enough space to be able to put my plot, my subplots, everything I need to put in there, plus all of those extra scenes that I'm fleshing out as that inspiration comes to me as I'm plotting. And the last thing that I found kind of difficult with the plot wall is the fact that the Post-it notes can be very deceptive. Obviously, you're writing down scenes that need to happen, but sometimes smaller or quieter scenes end up being a lot more words than you expect. And some of those bigger scenes end up being a lot less words than you expect. So when you're taking a look at things in your acts or various different structures, however you have it set up, you might think that you have way too many scenes in a certain section, but the fact is they're very fast-paced scenes that are very low word count, whereas you have a little bit more setup or background information that you're putting into various different acts that don't have as much description on the Post-it note itself. But when you come down to writing those chapters, they actually are very high word count chapters and need to be there to push the plot forward. So it can be a little bit deceptive depending on how you visualize your Post-it notes and how you write out your points on your board. So just because a lot of stuff is happening doesn't mean that's going to be a lot of word count. And just because it doesn't look like a lot is happening doesn't mean this isn't a hefty part of the book. All right, so that's all I have to say about plot walls. I will probably use one again if I ever get stuck on a plot, but for right now, I will probably go back to my tried and true methods of using my beat sheets and my Excel spreadsheets and all of those fun, fantastic formatting colors. If you've ever used a plot wall, please include that in the comments below and let me know how it went. And if you do decide to give it a try, also tell me how your experiment went. And always remember while you're hanging around the comments section to give this video a thumbs up to let YouTube know it's something worth watching. And if you are not a subscriber yet, make sure you're hitting that subscription bar and the notification bell so they can let you know every time I put out a new video. Thank you so much for joining me, and I will see you all next Thursday when I have my next video on writing and publishing. And until then, later, Writer Rebels.